morning. And today we are beginning this book, Instant Zen, Waking Up in the Present. It's the teachings of Zen Master Foyan. But before we get into his teachings, we're going to read the introduction to give you a little historical. Oh, look. I'm sure you heard me. I'm not going to do a do-over over that. So anyway, we're going to read the introduction, and then I'll see how quickly I get to reading the actual book. And that, hello, this is our next book. Get back to our roots, Zen. I'm half tempted to do 2 Zen Masters. I'm not so sure I feel good about my gaming idea. Anyway, here we go. While we persistently look forward, you see, I'm having troubles today. While we persistently look forward to tomorrow's technologies to solve our problems, writes Robert V. Adams, CEO, Xerox Technology Ventures and President, World Business Academy, we often find ourselves simultaneously looking backward, re-examining ancient wisdom on how to understand and enjoy ourselves and others in the process. As the practical relevance of ancient wisdom to modern problems becomes increasingly apparent, there is never a greater need to retrieve these essential insights from ages of cultural overlay, embellishment, and historical decline. Whether we are simply interested in developing the cosmopolitan outlook proper to citizens of the world, or whether we are also interested in higher philosophy and free thought, today it is no longer plausible to regard world wisdom traditions as the domain of esoteric cultists and fringe intellectuals. The effort to extract useful knowledge and pragmatic procedures from ancient lore is a hallmark of the original science of mind, known as Zen. While many sects and cults eventually grew up around the traces of original Zen, as a rule, these spin-offs return to the very same sort of sentimental religiosity and dogmatic authoritarianism that original Zen eschewed, making them useless, even counterproductive, in the way of Zen mind liberation. The essence of original Zen is self-understanding and self-realization. In classical Zen terminology, this development called attainment of maximum potential and maximum function. This is envisioned as a kind of liberation and a kind of awakening, which the many techniques of Zen mind art are designed to provoke and develop. The Zen understanding of the human condition is that we habitually get ourselves into all sorts of binds on account of our vulnerability to the influences of external and internal changes. The crux of the problem seems to be a lack of fluidity, a sort of rigidity in the way which we view the world and think about it. In a famous Zen simile, we are like someone in a boat who thinks the bank of the river is moving. Closer observation reveals that it is the boat that is moving, resulting in a changing perspective. Similarly, through Zen understanding, we can observe the changes in our body and minds that cause our view of the world and feelings for other people to fluctuate from time to time, altering our reactions and behavior. In this way, we can gain an extra perspective on ourselves and our lives, a more objective point of view, less distorted by unexamined biases and undetected inner currents, and thus master our own potential. What is the true self that Zen seeks to understand and to realize? To say it is like something, replied an ancient master, would be to miss the mark. A description, after all, is not the thing itself. The description, after all, is not the self itself. Zen seeks direct knowledge that must be experienced oneself. The use of Zen theory and concentration formulas is to arouse this latent faculty, making it possible to monitor its performance both rationally and intuitively. Many famous Zen sayings illustrate the seeming paradox of the self, so near at hand and yet so subtle and inscrutable to the self itself. Quoting, "Though it has long been in use, when questioned, no one knows what it is." What is this? Everyone uses it every day without being aware of it. How to become aware of it, and how to use this awareness as a foundation for mastering its use, is the task of Zen realization. It could be said that the object of Zen, therefore, is to awaken the self and to develop it to a degree of maturity that it is not dictated merely by physical or social needs. This involves inward discovery and empowerment of an autonomous core of subtly conscious, intelligent awareness, which observes and harmonizes the instinctual, emotional, social, and intellectual facets of one's being. In Zen terminology, this faculty is sometimes referred to as the director, by way of allusion to the function of the mature self. Referred to in Zen lore as the work, the development of the director is summed up with characteristic precision and beauty in the Buddhist scriptures, often quoted in Zen literature. Like, "It is better to master the mind than to be mastered by the mind." Thus, self-knowledge is an aim, but it is also a means. Self-knowledge is a means of deeper self-understanding and, ultimately, self-realization. In other words, self-knowledge is the Zen process. Self-knowledge in the Zen process is not pursued by means of theoretical study, but by means of itself. How is this accomplished is the content of Zen study, or how this is accomplished is the content of Zen study. When this is done, everything turns into Zen learning. I am learning how to read out loud as I do it. There are many statements in Zen technical literature designed to orient the learner toward understanding, then experiencing the real self, or the self apart from socially conditioned views, from which vantage point one then understands the real world through the real self. "You do not need to seek," said one of the great masters, "but you must save yourself. No one can do it for you." The original Zen teachings fostered the utmost and supreme independence and supreme responsibility for oneself. In order to overcome the potential for self-deception inherent in this posture, Zen masters insisted on experiential insight into the most fundamental nature of being itself. This was called seeing nature, or seeing essence. Seeing essence is also called gaining entry, signifying the initiatory nature of this experience. Zen teachings and practices do not deal only with the process of awakening insight into essence, but also with the aftermath of awakening, the process of maturing and applying Zen consciousness. That's what it says. Zen arose in China several hundred years after the introduction of Buddhism there, and operated in both religious and secular contexts. In religious contexts, first Buddhism, then Taoism, and later Confucianism, Zen taught people to study the living word of personal experience, rather than the dead word of doctrinaire dogmatism. Okay, well, actually I'm going to mark a spot here. This introduction is a scholarly introduction. We're going to find, as you read more and understand more Zen teachings, that living word and dead word have other deeper connotations than just religious book and structure versus personal experience. It does mean this, but this is not its only meaning. And one thing about Zen is we do not try to keep a hold conception of what things mean and say that is it. Because, well, you'll find out if you choose to continue joining us on the adventure of Zen Master Foyan. Okay, here we go. Religious Zen was both patronized and suppressed by despotic secular authorities, resulting in numerous distortions and deteriorations well documented in critical Zen lore. According to the accounts of the masters, by the 1100s, religious Zen had largely degenerated into stagnant sects and cults. Secular Zen was somewhat harder to trace than religious Zen. Records indicate its existence from the beginnings of Zen in China. Nearly half of the sacred patriarchs' enlightened disciples were secular people, and many other lay people of both upper and lower classes are on official record through the ages as being known as to have mastered Zen. There were also many female Zen masters, again from the very beginnings of Zen. One of the greatest of these women on record was only 13 years old when she was recognized by the most distinguished master in China. Another famous adept was barely 16 when she was enlightened, and she was also the daughter of an enlightened woman. One of the characteristics of degenerated religious cults, in contrast, is the spiritual suppression of women and secular people. Since the inner degradation of religion into cults tended to coincide with the deepening of affiliation with or captivation by political authorities, such cults are mostly what survived as religious Zen. With official recognition and support under extremely rigid conditions. In late feudal Japan, for example, lay Zen masters were legally forbidden to lecture on Zen classics, and journeyman Buddhist priests commonly taught that females could not attain enlightenment. Zen was under arrest. The unfortunate aberrations of misogyny and personal power-mongering witnessed in the modern Zen cults are, like pseudo-religious sectarianism, the heritage of such circumstances, not characteristics of original Zen itself or of real Zen at any time. This distinction needs to be made in order to actually experience the freedom and enlightenment of original Zen, avoiding the webs of suggestion and emotional conditioning used by religious systems that have become power structure, affording people means and opportunities for dominating and manipulating others. The usurpation and alienation of Zen is at the hands of ambitious careerists, turning it into a cult, is described by many of the masters of the 11th and 12th centuries. Dahui, one of the greatest of all time, wrote, "Students in recent times often abandon the fundamental and pursue trivia. Turning their backs on truth, they plunge into falsehood. They only consider learning in terms of career and reputation. All they have as their definitive doctrine is to take riches and status and expand their schools. Therefore, their mental art is not correct, and they are affected by things." Mayan, another distinguished master of the Song Dynasty, vigorously repudiated cultism and upheld secular Zen in no uncertain terms. He said, "Those who have not learned are in confusion. Not relying on the source, they abandon their families, quit their jobs, and wander around in misery, running north and south looking for Zen and Tao and seeking Buddha and Dharma on the tongues of old monks all over the land, intentionally waiting for their transmission, unaware that they have missed the point long ago." Zen and culture. In the statement of its own masters, the message of Zen is not of east or west, north or south. It is inherent to Zen, to say nothing of common sense, that people need not adopt an Eastern culture in order to understand and actualize Zen in one's own life. The so-called director in Zen psychology is so called precisely because it refers to a faculty or a capacity of consciousness that is not itself controlled or intrinsically modified by the process of social and cultural conditioning. One way to recognize a cult as a cult, in fact, is its superficial Orientalism. Changes in mood caused by environmental redecorations may occur, especially when combined with other forms of suggestion, but these are not actually Zen effects. Western Zen cults with an Oriental veneer neither reproduce or Eastern cultures nor enhance Western cultures. Authentic Zen is not a sideshow. The teaching is to harmonize with the environment, as illustrated in the famous proverb, "A good craftsman leaves no traces." There is, nevertheless, a way to describe the overall cultural context of Zen in a more specific manner. Zen Master Foyan refers people to the 5th stage of enlightenment according to the teachings of the 10 stages in the comprehensive flower ornament scripture, a favorite book by many classical masters and source of many of their teachings and techniques. I have got to buy this book. I lust after this book because all my favorite masters quote from it, and I want to know what it says. In this 5th stage, while it focuses on perfection of meditation at the same time, the practitioners thus engaged in developing people with minds continually following enlightened knowledge, engage in unregressing goodness, intent on the search for supreme truth, practice whatever in the world would benefit living beings. That's what it said. The text goes on to name occupations like writing, teaching, mathematics, science, medicine, song and dance, drama, music, storytelling, entertainment, city planning, agriculture, horticulture, and so on. The relevance of this approach to Zen, so different from that of self-centered cults, need hardly be further argued. The 17th century Japanese Zen master Mannan also wrote, "If you want to quickly attain mastery of all truths and be independent in all events, there is nothing better than concentration in activity." In the world of the modern West, where democracy and individual rights are legally recognized, not as yet fully realized, no issues could be more timely than self-understanding and self-mastery, or liberating the individual from confusing and deluding influences of all kinds, as to empower freedom of choice as an authentic individual capacity, and not just an abstract constitutional right or social ideal. The bafflement and mystification of exotic cults have no place in real Zen today, East or West. While it is common knowledge that Zen Buddhists use meditation of various sorts in their arts of mind cultivation, original Zen and imitation Zen cultism may also be distinguished in a parallel manner by comparison of the specific attitudes toward meditation. Zen that is exaggerated into a meditation cult, in which meditation assumes a status of value in itself, or attention is fixed on a given posture or procedure presented as an inherently sacrosanct, is a characteristic of deterioration. This is more of the nature of fetishism than enlightenment, as is particularly evident in cases where meditation is done ritualistically in random groups according to fixed schedules, even under pressure. Such activity results in obsession, not liberation. Unless you would agree. This was not the procedure of the masters. and it was not recommended in classical Zen meditation texts. The great Master Dahui said, "Nowadays they sound a signal to sit and meditate. If you want a solemn scene, there you have it, but I don't believe that you can sit to the point where you can attain stability. People who hear this kind of talk often think I do not teach people to sit and meditate. But that is a misperception. They do not understand expedient technique. I just want you to be in Zen meditation, whether you are working or sitting, to be essentially at peace whether you are speaking, silent, active, or still." The roots of the deterioration of meditation from a living means to a dead end were already observed in the classical era of Zen. The renowned Tang Dynasty Master Lin Shi said, "There are blind baldies who, after they have eaten their full, sit in meditation and arrest thoughts leaking out, to prevent them from arising, shunning clamor and seeking quietude. This is a deviated form of Zen." A generation later, the redoubtable master, redoubtable? What kind of a word is that? The redoubtable Master Song went even further in contrasting living Zen with pietistic quietist cults. This business cannot be pinned down. The road of mind and thought ends. It does not depend on embellishment. It is original true peace. In movement and action, talking and laughing. It is everywhere clear. There is nothing lacking. People these days do not realize this truth. Arbitrarily get involved in things, in material objects, influenced by all that is around them, fixated and bound up everywhere. Even if they understand, they find the material world a profusion of confusion, with labels and characteristics not corresponding to realities. So, they try to freeze their minds and curtail their thoughts, returning to voidness, shutting their eyes, clearing away thoughts over and over and over again, whenever they arise, suppressing even subtle ideas as soon as they occur. Such an understanding is that of an outsider who has fallen into empty nothingness, a corpse whose soul has not yet dissolved, void of awareness, void of cognition, plunged into infinite darkness. People who plug up their ears to steel bells only fool themselves. In the secular, busy Western world, in the crowded present day, quietism is even more out of place than it was 1100 years ago in China when these words were spoken. The original methods of doing the Zen work under all circumstances, the hallmark of secular Zen, seems to be best suited to contemporary conditions for the majority of individuals today. Like Zen needs to have a resurgence, man. Bring back the Zen. Bring back the Zen. Bring back the Zen. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Oh, gosh. I bet this is almost over, though. Then the introduction will be finished. One of the main tools for Zen in action is a highly concentrated form of Zen literature commonly known in the West by the Japanese name koan. These Zen sayings and stories were a means used even by the classical Zen masters to help people avoid the extremes and exaggerations of deviated Zen, so eloquently analyzed in their talks, yet so easy to forget in the course of daily life. These stories and sayings contain patterns, like blueprints of various inner exercises in attention mental posture, and higher perception, summarized in extremely brief vignettes, enabling the individual to hold entire universes of Zen thought in mind all at once, without running through doctrinal discourses or disrupting ordinary consciousness of everyday affairs. One of the original uses of Zen stories was to enable people to focus their minds in action, so as to not be dependent on external or internal quietude for meditation. This is documented in both classical and post-classical Zen lore. Like other meditation procedures, however, the interpretation and usage of Zen stories underwent peculiar metamorphosis in the imitation cults that proliferated after the golden age of Zen. These deteriorations are, fortunately, also diagnosed by distinguished masters of the Song Dynasty, so that seekers may be alert enough to avoid blind alleys in dealing with the literature that can often be difficult to understand, especially for beginners, and thus can provide a fertile field for charlatans and posers. Master Foyan said, "The reason this path has not been flourishing in recent years is nothing else but the fact that those who are acting as teachers of others do not have their eyes and brains straight and true. They have no perception of their own, but keep fame and fortune, gain and loss in their hearts. Deeply afraid that others will say they have no stories, they mistakenly memorize stories from old books, letting them ferment in the back of their minds so that they won't lack for something to say if seekers ask them questions. They're like goats cramping. The minute their tails go up, innumerable dung balls plop to the ground. Since students do not have clear perception, how are they supposed to distinguish clearly? Students believe deeply, with all their hearts, so unseeing individuals lead unseeing crowds into a pit of fire." In the West, where neither Chinese language nor Buddhist thought are generally known, it is even more critical to make sure that we understand the true structure of Zen stories and know their structure guides constructive concentration. Before trying to employ them. Considering what became of Zen koans even in the land of their origin, if we were to derive any real living enlightenment from contemplation of Zen stories, we must be aware of naively mistaking bafflement or mystification for authentic Zen effects. One of the peculiarities of Zen Buddhism is the idea that awakening can take place instantaneously. Zen training, from this point of view, does not mean learning doctrines, rituals, postures, but preparing the mind to accept this awakening and integrate it constructively with daily life in the world. Several deteriorations in Zen are associated with instant awakening. One is the premature induction of the experience, resulting in failure to attain an integrated personality. Another is inability to sustain and develop the newly awakened consciousness, again resulting in failure to achieve complete integration. Okay. It is in this connection, it should be noted that enlightenment in Zen generally refers to initiatory awakening, not to the full development known in classical Buddhism as complete perfect enlightenment. A rather more common deterioration of the instant awakening of Zen is mistaking an ecstatic experience or altered state of consciousness for this Zen awakening. There are many records of this in Zen lore, where it is sometimes described as mistaking a fish eye for a pearl. Since enlightenment may often be accompanied by a release of tension. Furthermore, there are cases where people mistake emotional catharsis for awakening, or even deliberately induce excessive tension in an effort to produce an ecstatic feeling of release. Attempts to mimic the Zen effect In this way, it can be observed in both Eastern and Western Zen cults, especially in recent generations. A more radical deviation in sudden enlightenment teaching was the doctrine that there is actually no such thing. This became fashionable among cultists in both China and Japan many centuries ago. Master Dahui, from 1089 to 1163, observed, "In the monastic Zen communities of recent times, there is a kind of false Zen that clings to disease as if it were medicine. Never having had any experiential enlightenment themselves, they consider enlightenment to be a construct, a word used as an inducement, a fall into the secondary, a subordinate issue. Those who have never had experienced enlightenment themselves, and who do not believe anyone else has had the experience of enlightenment, uniformly consider empty, inert blankness to be the primordial. Eating 2 meals daily, they do no work but just sit, calling this inner peace." Those who adopted this posture in feudal Japan also spoke of just sitting, but surrounded it with elaborate rituals, considering obedience to the regulations and observances of their cult to be all that was needed in the way of enlightenment. Back in China, Master Foyan also pointed out a more subtle fallacy of this no enlightenment Zen. Just because of never having personally realized awakening, people temporarily halt sensing of objects, then take the bit of light that appears before their eyes to be the ultimate. This illness is most miserable. The construction of fancy rituals and titles to celebrate and enshrine these experiences as absolutes made the situation extremely critical in the context of religious Zen. It might be said that this is another advantage of secular Zen, wherein realization must actually be effective in all experiences and not sacramentalized. And it is not sacramentalized. Historical records show that the spiritual failure of Zen Historical records show the spiritual failure of Zen without enlightenment movement. But they also show the attraction of this doctrine for authorities who wanted a static and ineffectual, state-approved religion to absorb excess energies of the populace in a way that the authorities could control without military action against their own subjects. Humans will human. As the classical masters themselves already pointed out in China a long time ago, authoritarian cultism, with its magisterial potentates, courts, regalia, and sacred mysteries, is actually a historical relic of the political-religious affairs, not the authentic heritage of enlightened living Zen. This book contains translations of general lectures on Zen by Foyan, who lived from 1067 to 1120. Whoa. So the Foy was after contemporary. Contemporary with Dahui, who is universally recognized as one of the greatest masters of the Song Dynasty Zen revival. Going back to the original and classical Zen masters, Foyan presents many simple exercises in attention and thought designed to lead the awakening of Zen insight into the real nature of the self. After the passing of the classical masters, very few Zen teachers equaled Foyan in the degree to which he fostered independence and autonomy and freedom in his hearers from the very outset. He was completely free of any desire for fame or followers, and made no attempt to recruit disciples. All he wanted was for people to open their own eyes and stand on their own 2 feet, to see directly without delusion, and act on truth without confusion. It is said that dozens of his hearers attained enlightenment. At least 15 of them are known to have become Zen masters and teachers in their own right. It is the master that I'm going to begin reading soon. Maybe in a few minutes, whatever. This is our book. I hope you join us.